Okay, welcome everybody to this afternoon's. This is a workshop on the Southward Spatial Plan. And councillors will be very familiar with this, and I think that we've got a lot of papers, and or some of you have got those all on your laptop for the written submission. So Nicola has just asked me if I would perhaps support the process, but we're really lucky that we've got Mr. Paul Burko who's come along, thank you, to speak to your submission. So Mr. Burko, we have it in front of us. Councillors will have read your submission, and our general convention is that, and I know you'll know this, that we offer you 10 minutes and then 5 minutes of questions, clarification, and then we need to carry on with the rest of our day. But I'm really grateful that you've given us your time to come along and speak with us. So with that, councillors, if you've got in front of you, it is submission number 18, and Nicola tells me it's page 54. If you just want to refer to that, you may have come with some prepared questions as well. But Ruth, it's lovely to have you with us again as you guide us through this process as well. So thank you. So, Mr. Burko, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I just emphasise that I am on the Leithfield Community Committee, but I'm not representing the committee. My views are my views here, and some of them have not even been discussed at the meeting. You'll be pleased to hear I don't plan to say very much, on the basis largely that those of you who don't need me to go over it, and if I can tempt you a little bit with some of the things I'm saying, you might find it interesting to go back and read it a bit more later on. So I'll just go through really briefly most of the stuff that I've prepared here, and the managed growth. The only thing I really disagreed with was the bypass for town. I raised this at the long-term plan. I would like some feedback, and if there's time at the end, maybe somebody might like to say something, and I can pass that back to our committee. But from an outsider, I just can't understand why the council isn't pushing for it, why there aren't some lines on a map showing where it might go, and I would have thought it should be pretty much top of the agenda. The way it is, it's hardly being mentioned. So I see it as a fairly major and important thing for the community to be getting on with, and I'd like to see the council being a bit more proactive. On the Leithfield bits, there's not a lot I'd like to say there really. Just supporting the stormwater and drainage. Some of this is hearsay from what I've heard of people in the past. I have spoken to some of the people at ECAN. I think there's perhaps an opportunity for more liaison there, and to make sure we push ahead with some of the work. As a resident and in the flood zone that I learned about after I came, I'm quite nervous about insurance premiums going up and that sort of thing. So it is an area that I think needs a little bit more attention. I got hold of ECAN's long-term plan, actually made a submission and picked up the $200,000 that they've got budgeted for upgrading the stop bank in Leithfield. And that's something that in my submission to them I supported, and I would like to follow through a bit more and perhaps get the community committee involved in supporting that, because I understand there's likely to be some targeted rates, and that is something that I would like to push for. The other relatively small thing is the community hall and the church, and an update on that. And I think I might have reported last time, the Amberley parish has passed a vote to sell the church and cemetery. In that there's their proposal, and they're quite strong on it, that they would like to, if it is sold, they would like to subdivide the land, retain the bit that the community hall is on, as a means of supporting the community. So that is really, really good. Initially, it seemed as though they weren't very interested in us and our views, but we had a very informal meeting with some of their parish members and a few members, just to see what we could do, and that went really very well. Our approach as the community committee was to see what we can do to help them with their financial situation, and see initially if we can work together to find a way in which the church may be saved for the community. At this stage, we're just gently working through how we can work with them, and I think things will progressively resolve themselves one way or the other, and hopefully we could get some support from the community and from the council to find ways of retaining that. There are a whole lot of ideas floating around, and it would be inappropriate for me at this stage to say anything more, but there are some opportunities there that will strengthen our case and perhaps save the situation. The other thing that I'd like to spend a little bit of time on is a proposal that I developed for preserving the character of Leithfield, and I've written quite a lot there, and I'm not going to go into much detail, but it's hard to say I'm new to Leithfield, and you might say, why am I interested in this? And that's partly because of my heritage. I go back to the first settlers in New Zealand in 1842. And my family and my parents have always been interested in heritage and the English culture and all of that the early settlers provided for New Zealand. We seem to be going through a bit of a period when the decolonisation people are getting a lot of weight, and there's not a lot being really done for supporting and maintaining our culture and our heritage as people who have largely descended from those early settlers. So I think to do something for Little Leithfield, which helps to preserve that culture and that heritage, would be really worthwhile. It's a bit of a project I started a little while ago, and I started off calling it preparing a heritage zone, and that sounded a bit formal and a bit complicated and a bit like old England was 300-year-old buildings, and I don't think we are into that sort of area. However, Leithfield does have a very significant history, and it is a very special little town. There are not many places where you can walk down the middle of the road with your dog, and even children riding their horses down the middle of the road. And the big thing is that we don't have State Highway 1 going through the middle of the town. And most early towns in New Zealand have the main road going through. So it is very special for that reason, and for the reason of its history, and in particular for preserving our heritage and our culture. What I propose is very simple, and that really looking at not a big complicated rezoning, but just sort of approaching it gently and perhaps putting some rules, some protocols around which helps to preserve it. And I'm talking a bit more than just keeping Leithfield small. I'm talking about preserving the church, preserving old cottages, and trying to keep the village small but in character. And I think that could be done if we just maintain the existing rules. So we can maintain the existing boundary for the town, the existing codes, but if somebody wants to come in and do something different, that's going to impinge upon the culture and the character of the town. And I think that should be flagged and have a process whereby that can be flagged early on before developers start spending a lot of money on their project and going to consent. And I think that's probably really all that I wanted to say.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time for the thorough and thorough submission, I guess, and as I said, coming to speak to us today. So I guess what I'm seeking now from council is if there's any questions to clarify what you've read or what you've heard from Mr. Burko for a minute or two while we. So is there any questions from councillors?
Well set out.
Yeah. Well done. So that must
Thank
mean you get a tick because
Well,
you've
that's
actually
good.
been very clear.
I was a bit nervous, though everybody was saying, I thought they might have found it boring.
No, I think it's really interesting, the context which you've spelled out in regard to the heritage values that you talked about and the unique position that Leithfield Village does hold, and the fact that you talked earlier about the bypass and State Highway 1 and just that real difference that you do see between one village, you know, adjacent to the other and how that does have an impact. So it's interesting, you know, some of that special character can be brought through in district plan reviews as well, you know, to retain those. Probably not a process for this, but it actually, you know, there may well be a process for a discipline, I guess, within our council. But, you know, with that, thanks very much. If we've, you know.
Can I say, as a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, is there some mechanism without going through codes and a whole lot of procedure whereby a ring can be put around Leithfield and it's saying it is special, and if you want to apply for consent, a flag comes up and people tread gently?
Yeah, I would probably defer to more experienced district plan personnel staffing, but I suspect that would be a district plan. I think what the word might be, qualification may be that if it was designated to be, for whatever reason, heritage or want to retain those characteristics, it would form part of the district plan. Nicola, can you help me probably from a professional perspective?
Yeah, I guess that would require a change to the district plan.
Yeah.
At the moment, to undertake an activity that's not provided for as a permitted activity would require resource consent. And through the resource consent, we would consider a range of effects. So we would consider things like landscape character, visual amenity. Through the resource consent process, we are able to consider the effects of an activity generally on the people and the environment.
Yeah. So just as a contrast, like Hemmer Springs as a special character.
So Hemmer Springs has design standards for the buildings up there. They were agreed a long time ago, I believe, by the community and the community. There was a community board at the time. Yeah. The community board to carry through the alpine character into the buildings. Yeah.
So we do have examples of that, but it's just from what you're describing, there is a process that needs to be gone through. So look, I think thank you very much for your time, and we'll continue with our work. And
right. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Hugo. Good. So Nicola, I'll hand it back to yourself and to Ruth, and we're in your hands really to workshop the rest of this information and give it help out, whatever you need.
Thank you. I'll just briefly run through the purpose of this afternoon. So the key purpose of this afternoon is to discuss the feedback that we received through the second round of engagement and any potential changes arising from that, and also to discuss the action plan and again any potential changes that might arise from that discussion. And this is all prior to officers finalising the plan. We're seeking to send the finalised plan to the council meeting on the 30th of July for adoption.
Sorry, following on from today, are you going through the same process with the South Ward?
That's something I'd like to discuss today.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So just to recap where we've come from. So we started early 2023 or late 2022, I can't quite remember now actually, but we had a number of workshops. We commissioned an economic overview report, which was presented to councillors, and all this background information informed the first set of draft spatial maps that we went out for our first round of engagement on. That engagement was during September, October 2023. We received 57 survey responses on that. We then took the feedback that we received through that survey and discussed it at workshops with yourself and the South Ward Committee for drafting up a draft spatial plan, which was approved by the Strategy and Community Committee at the end of March 2024. We then went out for a second round of engagement, which was part of the Council's Here to Listen engagement campaign. The main way we sought feedback through that was through a survey again. And in that survey, as you will have seen reading through the responses, we asked 6 key questions, and then for respondents to say whether they agreed with that, were neutral or disagreed, and provided a free text box for them to elaborate their thoughts. The spatial plan has been through, the spatial plans, engagement on the spatial plans, a slightly different process to the other engagements we've had running at the same time, like the LTP and the reserves management plan, and that this is a non-statutory process. So we've sought feedback, run submissions, and you will have noticed we haven't had a formal hearing process like for the other engagements. We did have Paul, Mr. Verco along as he had requested to speak to his feedback. All in all, on the second round of engagement, we received 41 pieces of feedback, which is that delightful package that you all received. So yeah, that just kind of recaps the earlier slides. So I've sort of, in the last 2 slides, recapped the first 2 lines. And so here we are at our workshop on the 4th of June, and the next key date will be hopefully adoption of the final spatial plan on the 30th of July council meeting. Cool. So before we go any further, I have a question, is how best you would like to go through the feedback that we received. We have, well, as I see it, 2 broad options. We can go through each individual piece of feedback, or we can go through in a more summarised way on going through each question and looking at the summary of the general feedback received. So we can either, go to specific feedback or a more generalised version. I don't know if there's any preference in the room about how you'd like to best attack this.
Summary.
I think the summarised version would be good. I'm sure I certainly read them all and
Yeah.
we had a sense of on that process. So
Okay. Cool.
And the summarise, and if there's any outliers at the end of the summarised discussion, we'll feed those out.
Yeah, or if there's anything specific people
Yeah.
highlighted through their reading of the
Yeah.
full submissions.
Yeah.
All right.
We've got general agreement?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so the first question that was asked was around residential growth in Amberley. Through the draft spatial plan, we are indicating a mixture of strategies, so a reduction of minimum lot sizes, excluding the large lot residential lifestyle lots, mixed use development, so a mix of residential and business within central Amberley, and then we've indicated longer term outwards growth to the east. Within the summarised feedback, so the key sort of themes within that stood out to me were people commenting on the impacts of growth. So things such as increased traffic affecting the functioning of the roading network, particularly those intersections with the state highway, impacts on our schools and impact on our infrastructure. There's a wide variety of responses on the reduction of minimum lot sizes. And those responses range from those who don't think that reducing minimum lot size is appropriate to those who think that it's necessary for us to. Some people provide some alternative suggestions that were a bit more specific on how the growth could be accommodated, such as specific drops in minimum lot sizes. And then a couple of respondents requested that good quality farmland is not used for residential properties. And so within that, just wondering whether the room is happy with the direction shown on the spatial plan, or whether anybody would like to discuss any potential changes to the indicated direction of intensification and growth based on feedback.
Okay, so just happy to take some chat?
Yeah.
Is that what you're doing?
And is it all right for me just verbally giving the summary? Otherwise, I can bring the summary up on the big screen.
It's a summary that you sent through.
Yeah,
to us,
essentially,
isn't it?
yeah. Just kind of giving the condensed highlighted version.
I had one bit of feedback from Sarah Walden. She had a planner look at their block up the road, and she basically, with being highly productive land, there's no way he'll get any consenting, because she'd already had 2 court cases in the High Court and they've lost both times. And it's not up to ECAN to change that, it's a national policy statement. The road provides everything.
Yeah,
So, you know, she said that for growth around Hamley, it's new growth, it's no go. It's just about bringing to with highly productive land.
yeah, so yes, it is highly productive land. So the first step of so the whole of Amberley is surrounded by highly productive land, particularly to the east, it's the most productive. So any potential plan change coming out of this, so changing our zonings in the district plan, one of the key first steps would be getting a consultant to provide us with a report justifying against the provisions in the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land. So the National Policy Statement sets certain tests, and so we need to prove as part of that process that we can clear those tests. That sound?
Yeah, on page 15 of the draft spatial plan, we have front-footed that NPS HPL issue. It's really critical. You know, it's probably one of the biggest issues for definitely growth outwards in Hamberley. And one of the tests is that in order to grow outwards onto highly productive land, you have to demonstrate basically that you've looked at all other options. So that's why what Nicola just described before around reducing minimum lot sizes, allowing for higher density housing, those are all levers that the council can pull to provide capacity here. And once that's exhausted, grow out. And of course, remembering that this is the 30-year strategy, so.
It kind of supports some of the submitters saying, yes, higher density living is okay, but it also flies in the face of other supporters to say, actually, no, we like the characteristics. And so, you know, like, where do we find that sweet spot in this whole process, really? Because, you know, it's, you know, particularly with the highly productive land, I mean, we can't sort of spread beyond our urban boundary as we know it at the moment, or it's more difficult to do so. Is that kind of, am I reading the room right?
Yeah, I think the first option is definitely to intensify within Amberley. And then once that's done, and depending on population growth and capacity, you get that looked at again, and you can justify moving outwards.
Can I just add to that, that a number of people that I've spoken to in relation to this have expressed real concern, verging on fear, I think, out there about what density housing actually looks like. And when I've actually explained, look, I understand how how you feel, it doesn't actually have to be what we all think of as density housing. And I sort of referenced a number of projects that have gone on in the city, and I said, there's no reason why it can't look really amazing. And I said it actually, and they said, well, how can we do that? And I said, well, it actually comes back to council to create those, not going to use the word covenants, but design standards in our district plan. So I think it's really vital that we encourage the community to consider that, but with those limitations.
And guidance is critical.
Yep.
So a lot of what's happening around the country, that's similar concern.
Yeah, so
Having medium density design guidance really allays people's fears.
Yeah.
What the wider issue on that is if there is an opportunity to do that, is to do it in keeping with the Amberley town character and so on. Because it's not just the fear of someone taking a section bolt and knocking down an old house, putting 4 flats on there and whatever, because that's some of the feedback which we've read in some of these submissions, but there's a lot of other feedback in here in more general terms, which says whatever we do, retain the Amberley town character. It's a country town, whatever. So that's got to be balanced in somewhere about not just subdividing for the sake of subdividing to prove we've done it, so that we can then start to push out into highly productive land. I mean, there's a balance in there we need to be aware of.
I think
in my view.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Gary, I thought you first.
Yeah,
Okay. One of the ones I read, I guess, is to consider whether the higher density means allowing infilling. And for some people, that would probably may well be quite beneficial to them as they downsize, retire. On the other hand, that might change the very character you're looking to protect, and maybe higher density might be better in new development, new areas. Where's the mix? I think that would be something that would give some people assurance, potentially.
Hi, Dave, and then Karen. Don't know who put their hand up.
Like that.
Yeah, spending a bit of time driving through, in Rolleston and Moskill, you've got to be careful with the infilling. Because Moskill's a real good, parts of Moskill are a real good example why it doesn't work, but I understand why they're doing it. Because a lot of the elderly people are wanting to move into a smaller, warmer house, and that's the one way that they can do it. They can't afford to go into Amberley Estate or what the hell it is, but they're in a cold house, and so the infilling is down there. I just can't believe what some of the sections and what they're putting on them, and there's a high demand for them. It's like a container going on there, and it's son's a real estate agent couldn't sell that. Sold the next week to elderly people wanting to go into a smaller, manageable, warm house. So yeah, it's got to be done.
So yes, my question sort of relates to what you were saying, Dave, and that's what can we do in our planning to give effect to holding on to, like people alluded to, privacy and I guess sun and those sorts of things. Can we do things with, in terms of planning with, I don't know, angles and setbacks and roof lines and, things like that to help sort of preserve the parameters so that people can actually buy with confidence, knowing that if the section of the property next door gets sold, they're not going to have something like this, right up to their nose almost at the gate. So do we have mechanisms to do that, and do we need to change anything to make it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we currently have those types of things, recession planes, access to sunlight, maximum heights and things like that. As part of any, so I guess at the moment we're just indicating that council would be looking at changing, dropping the minimum lot sizes.
Yeah.
So as part of that, there's another process, plan change to the district plan. And I would anticipate that we'd be looking at that quite holistically. We wouldn't just be, okay, we're dropping the minimum lot size to 300 square metres and not looking at, what the impacts are on that. So, be a whole holistic look, and potentially if we're looking at medium density, potentially there's some sort of design standard or guidelines around that. But we wouldn't just be dropping it and not looking at anything else. It would be a holistic picture of what the impact that would be, and the plan change process through the Resource Management Act sort of directs us to look at all those effects and things like that as well. So it directs us down that path to consider those options, and also have a public submission process where people can provide feedback and be heard and all that kind of thing. So there is another public sort of submission process to that.
Okay, we're happy.
All right, so I take it from that we're all happy just to kind of proceed as things that. Sorry, words coming this afternoon. So I take from that discussion that there aren't any requests for changes to what we've indicated in the spatial plan to date.
It's very broad, allowing.
It is very
for
broad.
But hasn't got to the point of where that might be, whether it's across. So it's just people understanding that we could have smaller sections, which actually I think the whole time I've been on council, there's been discussions about that ability to have smaller sections, so.
I
We
guess,
did
yeah.
put in some allowances at one station, we reduced it a little bit, a while in the last district plan, do we?
I think we made them
Bigger.
bigger. Yeah, I can't remember what the last district plan was not.
Yeah.
This means, Nicola, oh, sorry, the reduction in minimum lot sizes. Was I asleep? Probably. Where did we, can you just expand a little bit on that? What did we put out there in the draft plan for the community to look at with regards to that?
Hold on, I'll bring it. Should have broken the actual.
I've got it. You didn't say it.
We didn't specify any specific drop in minimum lot size, so I guess that kind of feels a little bit of the community's uncertainty, because we're just kind of saying at a strategic level that council's going to look into dropping the minimum lot size. We haven't sort of said we're going to drop it down to this specific size. And so we've essentially just shown that all through Amberley, except where we've got the larger sort of residential lifestyle blocks, sort of up Willowside Place and Douglas Road, and then down Riverside Place.
So what's minimum at the moment? Is it 400?
So the minimum is 400, but any development should have a average of 700 square metres.
Yeah.
So that's sort of to result in, I guess, a variety of lot sizes. But we have seen with the clearing through their resource consent, they went up quite a lot lower than that 700 square metre average.
Yeah.
But that's the general idea, I guess, of the rule at the moment.
So you're saying that that we are discussing the idea of perhaps going smaller than 400? Because I personally wouldn't be in favour of that.
Yeah, potentially at this stage. I don't know that for general. I don't know that for general lots you'd tend to go much smaller, but it might be that certain areas which we've hold on. And there should, sorry, I thought I was going a different.
But one of the options that you'd explore as part of the plan change, so it may just be removing the 700 average.
Right.
And just having a 400 minimum.
Okay.
Other things you can do is if you're developing comprehensively in Greenfield, you can do away with the minimum lot size because you're doing, say, a block of terraced housing, for example.
Yeah.
There's lots of different
Ways of approaching it.
mechanisms to do
Okay.
it now.
Yeah.
And lots of good examples of what's working around the country too.
And lots of bad examples in terms of very small section, 400 square sections, whatever, in some cases even 350, and the likes of parts of Queenstown, Handler's Farm and other places, where not only is the section size so small, the street width is small. It turns out that the street is actually full of parked cars on both sides. It's now a one-way road and there is no green space. And coming back to some of the comments in here about the special character of Amberley and Country Town, whatever, it sparked a thought with me in terms of future planning, whether it's into district plan or whatever it is, when it comes to the likes of a new subdivision. I can't speak for the clearing because that's obviously all consented and underway. But if there is to be a minimum size of 400 or a whole development of 400, we actually need our own rules in there for Amberley, different to the Queenstowns, which says the road width has to be this minimum, not non-negotiable. There needs to be not more big parks, but at least space for more trees and a bit more greenery, because that's what Amberley sort of, that's this country feel.
That's really, sorry, Gary.
No.
I'm just going to say that's actually really important, because so I guess what you're saying is that we could entertain that, but we also need to mitigate those other issues by saying, okay, well, we'll let this through, but we need this amount of trees, we need this kind of landscaping, roads, and like this, and we also are putting some quite strict design standards on the buildings that go in there along those lines, perhaps.
It's a fascinating process, isn't it, really, because we've equally read some of the, where they understand the tree burden of the, like it's finding the cost point to actually, finding the sweet spot, I guess, to actually retain the character grow us and make us look, you know, with new subdivisions, because, you know, that's the balance really, but actually have a vibrant treescape. You know, like, it's all that.
Evergreen, so they're not dropping leaves.
Yeah.
Which was one of the comments.
Yeah, 100%, you know, so it's, we've read the diverse views about actually how we're actually going to get to this place to say, this will work for medium density because of these reasons, but these allotment sizes should still have that rural character. I mean, that's kind of where we're trying to get to, isn't it, really? Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Sorry, Robbie, but
Yeah.
I'm sitting in front of you and blocking it.
One, were you going to say something, Robbie?
Oh, I'm just going to make the comment with intensifying, you know, as the gaps are filled, that it's important we keep an eye on the linkages, even if they are, some good examples would be through the new development down, well, Foster's Place, you know, pathway through there, for example. An example where it's perhaps being missed. Where you get two different developers doing two different things, you can't, from here to here. But you know, as the gaps are filled, that we're not closing, you know, where people used to take a shortcut across the town, it's like, now they can't, all that sort of thing. Yeah.
As things expand and grow, you might not be able to take your shortcut across somebody's paddock anymore. I think the other thing that's interesting, because there is that tension between adding more trees, which helps to cool things and makes it beautiful, but adds the costs, is with the trees and the maintenance of the parks and reserves and all that sort of thing at the moment, as it stands, to understand what the total cost of that is, and if we're going to more than double it. So that people, if they choose a park, actually are fully informed. Your rates might, so we can do this, but we'll have more people, so it'll be spread among more people, but this is actually the cost today of doing it, of looking after all these things, because I think we always say, put in another reserve and another this, and it's hundreds of thousands of dollars across the district for the spent on reserves, and then we want to keep them to a particular standard, and then we want an amenity mow in a certain place because it's important, and it costs an arm and a leg and a donkey.
Okay.
But this is conceptual, not very cost stupid
Well,
things.
just on the end of that, you had a couple of miscellaneous things I want to try and ask you about. One was a community garden, and I'm thinking, you know, a lot of people would have space on our current lot sizes for their own garden. But I guess if we're going to have more intensive housing in some areas, allowing a wee space for that mightn't be a bad thought. And also I see a number of people I noticed mentioned the sewage pond location, and I haven't seen anything on a long-term plan that looks at an alternative for that, but I guess in principle it's not a good place to have it. And is that something perhaps not for this process, but for somewhere that we need to make allowance for? I'm not sure who to direct that question to, but I think it's quite valid. Dan, apparently.
Or one or the other.
Yeah,
So I guess
okay.
the reports we had looked at our infrastructure that's at risk, and the sewage ponds are not at risk from sea level rise. They may be subject to some inundation from flooding from time to time, but fit for purpose, at least for the next 30 years. There's the Amberley sewage treatment. Yeah, we have done reasonably comprehensive work on that. So I don't know what we can get back on, but that's what the science has told us.
We've just received the renewal, the new consent, haven't we, Dan, for my understanding is we've got a new consent.
Okay,
It's good for all down there, so there's been a misconception that that site is subject to the same thing, the same risk as Amberley Beach, and it's not.
okay, good to know.
Is there capacity if we intensify? Will we have to look at further sewage if we sort of double the what size of,
Yeah, I think we would without doing a comprehensive study. It's quite a bit of work that's being done for the new consent there, which looks at the efficiency of what we're doing. And but it is very close to a couple of wetlands. It's quite a wet area down there, and I don't know whose idea it was to stick it there in the first place, but it doesn't seem the most brilliant location in the world. Yeah, I mean, I think that we over time will need to look at in combination with capacity, but probably over 100 years or 50 years location.
so, but that's not part of the spatial planning. So we're not counting services into the spatial planning?
Yeah, we are to a degree, yes, but we're not looking specifically at a location, a specific location for where we could at this stage. There's lots of options for where we could put it.
Sorry, it hasn't been granted, but it's been lodged with ECAN.
And I've got to remind myself, and I'm sitting there talking about how much it costs to look after trees, actually this is a high level. So it's not about that, so slap me there.
All right, got quiet around the room, so
you
we'll
go.
move on to the second question. So the second question was around the residential growth in Leaffield. So the draft spatial plan. So originally we had shown a little bit of potential for infill housing, but through the feedback we got through the first round of engagement, we revised that to retain essentially the status quo in Leaffield. So not indicating that we change change the urban boundary or change any of the current planning controls around density. So I guess in terms of the feedback we received on that, we heard from Mr. Burko, who has thoughts around sort of a heritage village concept for Leaffield. Most of the written feedback seemed to support keeping Leaffield Village as a village. There were some comments sort of around stormwater and being located within a flood hazard zone, so it's not wise to increase density unless solutions to that are found. There were comments around a footpath down Leaffield Road. Yeah, but most of it seemed to be sort of around keeping, most people want to keep Leaffield as it is now.
No one wants it to grow.
No,
It's pretty straightforward.
100% score. No one wants it to grow.
I might have spoken to the exception.
Oh.
Not very long ago, I had an ex-councillor saying to me, who said that, whose idea was that? I know someone that's got a plan, he'll be taking people to court if we can't do that. So I don't know whether someone submitted saying, hang on, I've got to, might want to develop something like that.
In the first engagement round, I did speak to somebody who had land outside of Leaffield and wanted to develop it.
Outside the village.
Outside
I don't know the
village,
whole
yeah.
what or whatever.
Yeah.
It just struck me, I said to him, I said, well, that's not the feedback that we've got so far.
He's spoken to me as well.
But that sits outside what we're proposing, doesn't it? That's right. Yeah, because it's a rural, we're talking about the same.
Does this specifically Leaffield Village? Is
Yes,
this
Leaffield
where
Village.
it's got the urban type housing?
Yeah, where the current, I guess.
Down boundary.
Boundary is,
Right. So that doesn't preclude somebody outside of that area doing something. Unless it's highly
so-
productive land.
Well, yes, there is highly productive land around Leaffield as well. So I guess it depends what they want to do.
Yeah.
So if they wanted to, within the rural zone, create something that was very urban in character, they definitely need resource consent, but potentially it might be that they actually should be applying for a plan change to change the zoning of that block of land to, so it's appropriate for what they're looking to do.
And there's a piece of land adjacent to the village that belongs to someone that's closely associated with the person you were talking to, and they have expressed a desire, not necessarily through this process, to have that land rezoned and make it part of the village. So
Well, one of the other thing that caught my eye down Leithfield with land use just recently was as you go down from Pakeka Junction down to Leithfield, on the right hand side, there's a big chunk of land that was all fenced off and was going to be, to me, it was supposed to be nature and wetland and all the rest. But there's a great mob of cattle in it at the moment, so I don't know quite how that one fits anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Cattle and nature.
Lower this blue.
Anyway, it's Star Trek.
Oh, is there any other comments around the room, or are you comfortable leaving? Expectations as far as it is?
I don't think we're brave enough to do that.
It's a gorgeous place, you don't want to change it.
I think they've all been followed up by Hamish's, exquisite comments around, move to a place.
Yes, they were quite.
Well done.
Oh, maybe my question is too specific, actually. Just in regards to what we heard from Paul about the proposed sale of the church, and I know the church are talking about supporting the community by wanting to subdivide the land. Is there a special process for that? And I'm sorry, I think maybe I'll ask Judith later, because it's probably not. Yeah, sorry, it's not related. Well, it is, but it's not. Well, no, it is related actually, because the communities, like at the moment, it's a very, very hot topic, and they're wanting to work with the Anglican parish. And so the indication from the parish is that they'd like to consider, well, this is my understanding, the sale of the church and the cemetery, but the piece of land that the community centre sits on, maybe that being retained and bought by or gifted to the, so I think, because that is kind of their community hub.
Yeah.
So how does that fit with the plan moving forward? I guess, is this our opportunity to support that?
Yeah, I guess in terms of spatial plan, one thing I had thought of after reading the feedback is that on our map of Leithfield, we haven't actually shown the community centre or acknowledged it. So I thought it might be useful to, because we've indicated halls. Have we indicated halls?
That would be a good idea to do.
Yeah, that's what we could have shown on that. I guess in terms of how that handover works, I can't comment on that. But in terms of the mechanism, they would have to undertake you have to get a subdivision consent to subdivide off that block of land, which I would have to have a look at our rules, but I don't instinctively see any insurmountable problem. But again, haven't looked into the rules, so I can't say
So if it went against the district plan in regards to the rules, there would be a pathway to explore a consultative pathway, I guess.
Yeah, I believe there would be a pathway through subdivide to subdivide that bit of land off from the main church. But as for how that comes into the hands of the community and money and things like that.
No, that's getting too specific for this process. No, that's cool. Thank you.
Well, the cemetery is a curiosity in that whole process as well, isn't it? That's what I was thinking.
Consecrated ground.
Yeah, that's right. How does that work? How to subdivide off the community hub and the church and sell off the church? Isn't the cemetery on the same block?
Yes, it is.
So how do you, well, is that possible? I suppose anything's possible, but it's an interesting curiosity I was thinking about.
That's a good question. I hadn't actually realised there was a cemetery with the.
It's certainly been talked about.
So some peculiarities, I guess, about the site, isn't there really?
Yeah,
Anyway.
that whole lot's 2,500 squares, so it's quite a big lot.
Yes.
Reasonably easy to subdivide, I think.
It's only a small number of graves, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even so.
But it's still graves, don't get me wrong, but yeah.
Yeah, and the saleability, or
And I guess the church does this from time to time on other properties over the years. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, anyway, it's probably a little bit outside of what we're talking about
It
here.
is.
but-
Good question.
I was gonna say, we haven't gone down the rabbit hole, we're building a warren.
Yeah, no, sorry, I did think it was too specific, but it's of interest at the moment,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's of interest that I can leave before 5, 6 o'clock
Yeah.
tonight.
Okay, far ahead, Nicole.
All right, so, any other comments around Leaffield, or we'll
No,
move on to the
no,
next?
It's clear cut, really.
Brave enough on a Tuesday.
All right, so the next question we asked was around community and business spaces. So at the moment, the draft spatial plan indicates streetscape improvements to Markham Street, a town centre improvement, and the development of a community hub.
Can I just ask a question before we launch into this? The discussion within the submissions around the Eastern Reserve, is that something that we talk about here, or does that fit with the reserves management review?
My opinion, it fits within the reserves management review.
Cool, I just wanted to be clear
Yeah.
on where the line was.
Yeah, so we're more looking at a higher level, so we're looking, I guess, at rezoning an area as the Eastern Reserve, but the actual specifics of the use of it, my opinion is that's better considered through the reserves management plan.
But when we do that, we should take these submissions forward and across to that, because there will be people
Yeah,
who
so-
fill this out thinking they've had an input on the Eastern Reserve and haven't engaged in the reserve management plan process. So we just, I think, need to be careful that we take this feedback across.
Yeah, so on that point, I have spoken to Maria and we have exchanged feedback submissions.
Okay.
So anything that's talked about Eastern Reserve, I've been, hi Maria, let's make sure these are, and I think a lot of when they were all being allocated to the different engagement where something covered a couple of topics, Laura sort of proactively put it in a couple of different folders. So yeah.
They did say they were doing that
Yeah.
as part of the process.
I guess for councillors, if you've got your red pen by something and you might want to double check that it gets hooked up into that process, just keep it on your flag or whatever, so that it doesn't get lost in the system. And then, because there's an enormous amount of work for staff to make sure that that double crossing was done. So, it's okay.
Yeah, so yeah, as far as possible, where I've seen anything obvious, I've tried to pass that information on between us. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, so just to refresh the minds, hopefully the mouse will move at the same pace that I think I am. So we'd indicate on the spatial plan streetscape improvements to Markham Street. There was a mock-up of that included in the spatial plan document. Also indicated some sort of, oh God. All right. Okay.
It's really hard to do.
Yeah, because it doesn't seem to move where I think it's going. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we'd indicate town centre development and a community hub near the library. So in terms of the feedback on that, most of it generally seemed quite supportive. The main tension I found when I read the feedback was around Martin Street and the potential for, so there were some who didn't think it was going far enough, that it should be fully pedestrianised, and others who didn't like the idea of it because in their opinion that would lead to more heavy vehicle movements using Douglas Road rather than Markham Street. So there's an interesting, definitely an interesting tension there between the different types of feedback. In terms of the town centre development and community hub, that generally seemed fairly positive. There are a few, I guess, more specific bits of feedback around what type of community centre, delving a bit more into the detail rather than the high level strategic, some suggestions of different locations potentially, but generally seem quite supportive on those two.
Was there any flavour on whether it should be on which side of the state highway it should be, the eastern or the? I mean, if you're looking holistically, if you're growing out that way, whether it's on State Highway 1, although it might not be State Highway 1 if we've left provision for a bypass something, some stage, but.
Yeah, so there was a couple of suggestions, like somebody suggested the tin, like what's wrong with the tin shed, another person said, oh, Eastern Reserve, that would be a great location. My feeling is having it near where the library is, that's still, even if it is on the eastern side, it still remains quite central to the Amberley Township, and together with the library, and if there like some sort of town centre improvements around that area, around Brackenfields. There's comments around how Amberley doesn't have a heart, that would start to create that heart, and it's still, yeah, reasonably central, whereas if you put it Eastern Reserve or Tin Shed area, those are much further out to the nodes of Amberley rather than, yeah, that's central. On the eastern side, but central.
And theoretically, the side that will grow.
Yeah.
And not necessarily out into productive land, but that will, the population expansion will be on that side as well.
Likely, yes, yeah.
And we don't have a lot of control on getting over that state highway safely, because that is one of the big dividing factors, isn't it?
So, Nicola, on the note of the state highway, I haven't actually seen any plans potentially where a heavy vehicle or a bypass would go, because that sort of needs to be part of it, but is it not?
Yes.
I mean, has there been any thought on where that could go?
So I have, through this process, have had discussions with NZTA. There doesn't seem to be any appetite for a bypass to Amberley. I guess there is currently a de facto bypass in terms of there is a back road, yeah, through there. And then I guess there's also the balancing between having the state highway running through Amberley. There's a lot of pros and cons to that.
Yeah.
Quite often we focus on the negative parts of that because they are, I guess, quite obvious when you're trying to turn right onto the state highway. Even from here, sometimes that's quite challenging. But yeah, there's a lot of positives that come with that. So,
and at least we have the width of our state highway, and like Woody as an example, I guess it doesn't.
There's two pieces in the infrastructure strategy around that. One is, as Nicola says, around the back. And when the bridge comes up for renewal, that goes from Reserve Road onto Crampton Road. But we could realign that bridge and take it straight forward and round.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in the future, there's obviously going to be a truck stop down at the end of Grays Road.
Yeah.
So does that encourage them vehicles to turn off of the Balky and Amberley Road onto Grays Road to come up and then all the way through Amberley? And if they do, the infrastructure strategy then contemplates sealing Grays Road, and making it ready for heavy vehicles.
Okay.
So they're the two things that we've thought about for the long term.
Is there a timing plan for the truck stop at this point?
I don't know.
And have you?
petrol station,
They've lodged that consent, haven't they?
has it been granted? The one on the corner, the gold pines,
Pine,
yeah, they've got resource consent to put in
I'm
a,
not sure what their timing is. It was ages ago, their resources.
it was granted last year. Yeah, late last year.
Yeah, so the concern from my point of view then is when that does, then all the heavies start coming up Grays Road.
Yeah, that would make complete sense.
Instead of coming down Lawcox Road.
Yeah, all continue, well, yeah, up through Markham Street.
Because yeah, one of the issues I think that came out of this, and in that 68% who agree that some form of proposed improvements, there's a very difference of opinion between those who would like it to see go further than as proposed and go right down to a pedestrian type level, which has then got to factor in the fire station, or those who say no, it's so well used now as a traffic route and we cannot send those trucks all the way down through the residential area of Douglas Road out to the Blue Dairy. Therefore, we have to almost keep Markham Street as it is. We can beautify it, but it's gonna have to be a truck flow, because there are more and more trucks
Yeah.
at the moment using that road, and that's a point still, I think, of not dissension, but debate within the survey at the moment. And I guess the reality is, in terms of possible Grays Road development, that's not going to be in the absolute foreseeable future, is it? I mean, it's 5 or 10 years away or whatever. So there's a bit of thinking, I think, and further input required around what happens with Markham Street. Can we improve it to make truck flow, vehicle flow a little more customer friendly, whatever the words are? I mean, maybe it should be 40 or 30 kph, so as to slow it down. But then they've got to still get out, you know, and there's debate. I think there's some feedback in there about the hotel right on the corner. What can we do to ease left and right hand turns and so on? There's a whole lot of debate on that yet that sits in underneath that big 68% orange zone, saying, yes, we'd like to do something with Markham Street, but what exactly is practical?
Yeah, or do you be very brave and incentivise those people to move to an undeveloped area of Brackenfields and create something pretty special there?
In Brackenfields, yeah.
Everybody, you know, you really look for the 30 years in your visionary around the library, the community hub.
Yep.
And then you create something really cool on that land that recognises the old. And I don't know, we've been going to Melbourne a bit, you know, those funky kind of laneways, those lovely outdoor areas, not Brackenfields, but something different. So I suggested this to Hamish and he said, you'll never get them to move, but you know.
Well, there's not very many there to move.
But there's
You might find someone quite resistant though.
Yeah.
No.
We could just direct all the trucks down there.
We can just put the bumps back in the road.
There is some pretty cool sort of historic
Yeah, oh, yeah,
heritage, not heritage type buildings there. There's an existing story, but can you recreate it somewhere else? Or do you say, actually, well, it's how brave and forward thinking you want to take it.
And it's not just Markham Street, it's also back into whatever's up there, the second dot point, town centre improvements, and you talked about community hub and so on, because there were brainstorming sessions 20 years ago, which was how do we shift the panel beater off that site and get a panel beater into the new industrial area over here, and whoever owns the post shop, whatever, get hold of that whole corner site and put a community centre there with a walkway to the library, a walkway to the medical centre, and then a walkway across to the pharmacy and Brackenfields, and then it's all in, you know, one big town centre, so to speak.
I guess it comes back to the question that you've been grappling with on Queen Mary South as a council developer.
Yeah.
I absolutely.
Does the council take the lead, or does it leave it to market forces?
Yeah, or do we follow the example of a Waimati whatever, and we find a local leading businessman who says, yep, I believe in this and I'll help you make it happen. And it's not just Waimati, there's others as well, but yeah. Reefton's another example, Rooney and Waimati.
The people that's got businesses there, like the property owners.
Sorry, where?
On Markham Street, about, I see some saying turn it into a pedestrian, but was anyone asked the businesses what they thought?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Did we talk to the Blue Moon people?
Not specifically
No.
through this process. We didn't receive, well, there wasn't any obvious feedback coming from the businesses along Markham Street.
Because they'd have the most scum in the game.
Yeah, and then I guess, because when there were roadworks down there, I know from speaking to some of the business owners there that their income dropped because people wouldn't walk. You know, they want to park and jump in for their coffee or whatever. So then there's that whole parking issue that came up through this process as well.
And we've seen that up and down the country where people have decided to pedestrianise things or just have cycles and the businesses have dropped off. And so it's finding the balance.
That's right.
And I quite like the idea of starting it, well, finding a hub type thing on the eastern side over there and maybe being brave, but is it that we purchase the, we don't own that land over there, so we'd have to purchase it, and whether we want to develop it, because I think you've got to put some serious thought into that and ways to do it, but maybe it is be brave.
I think the encouraging thing out of this though is that there is a feeling of doing something. I mean, we don't have all the answers yet.
Yeah.
There is some level of momentum and feeling which says, yes, somewhere between a town centre, Markham Street, whatever, let's see what we can do. So yeah, I think it's a positive and more thinking, more discussion required.
And just one other thought too there, Nicola, from a tourism perspective. You know, we've been talking about having projects that might be sort of welcome that concept, you know, what would make people want to stop in Amberley, and if they can see, oh, the toilets are right there and, you know, I can buy my lunch there or go for a walk there, you know, if it's things are closest together and they can see where they can park and it all looks, yes, then they're more likely to stop. And so it's not just the beautification thing, I suppose, thinking about it from a practical visitation point of view, you know, get people to consider stopping. I'm thinking about anyone or everyone will know the Colvin one, you know, where you've got sort of cafes in the public toilet in the car park, all just right there and really obvious. And it's sort of giving people a reason to stop, and then having the retail opportunities and so on for people to have a wander around and spend a little bit of time and hopefully some money.
Increased dwell time, I think.
Yes. Twice was a good opportunity, for example.
But so I guess I'm saying we need to remember we're not just catering for residents, we are hoping to perhaps cater for visitors as well.
Yeah.
Or tourism businesses that want to cater
Yeah.
for visitors, so
Yeah.
increasing tourism.
Yes, fair comment, yeah.
What I thought while we're discussing this is that it might pay to jump forward to the action plan. So at the moment, we have a couple of actions in there. So one was around developing, so I'm talking specifically around actions 11 and 13. So currently action 11 is developing a master plan for development of the town centre in Andley. And then action 13 is more specific to streetscape and activation improvements along Markham Street. And so I highlighted having a discussion around these two actions to see whether we want to keep them as two separate actions, or whether, as kind of has been a little bit discussed now, having something a little bit more holistic. So we're looking at them at the same, I guess at the same, it's part of the same thing rather than as two sort of separate projects. And so had also just made an update to number 11 is in terms of development of a master plan, engaging an urban designer to sort of develop that for us. But yeah, just while we're on the subject, yeah, whether anybody's got any thoughts around the actions there, whether based on the discussion or you would like to see something a bit more holistic, or whether you're happy having two separate actions on that piece.
Does one not feed into the other?
They do kind of feed into each other.
If we, you know, someone that is an expert on
Yeah.
urban design, if we gave them number 11 without giving them some context around, some thought around Markham Street, we're probably only giving them half the story to come back with an urban design to say, you know, let's put these funky wee chairs here and we, you know, whatever they do, you know, to zhuzh it up. But I think if we don't, one can't work without the other. They're probably a parallel process to get the desirable outcome. And I hadn't thought about the women panel beater in the middle of town, but actually what a cool idea. I mean, how cool would that be? You know, like But that might be what the urban designer might look at and say, this is where the heart could be and this is how you get there. And then it might influence our long-term planning around it, you know, but my personal opinion is you can't do one without the other.
Yeah.
They've got to have an understanding. If we have the urban design concept, they've got to understand what are some of the other factors.
Yeah.
That'd be my thoughts. Anybody else?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I wonder if, like, having an urban designer who can, because I think probably us sitting around in this room are probably quite connected to Markham Street and the history there, as we should be, because, you know, heritage is important, but when you consider all of those other issues around state highway and transport and whatnot, you know, an urban designer might do exactly what you suggest, Murray. They might see something completely different that could be amazing and that could, yeah, replicate.
Well, you know, because that part of a lot of the thread that comes through around, no, I don't like Markham Street being pedestrianised, is about the transport issues.
Yeah.
But if someone came up with some ideas around fixing the transport issues, you might have a completely different view of the outcome of pedestrianising. It's a weird word, isn't it? Pedestrian, whatever. The Markham Street or any other alternative. I mean, I'm just thinking from the post office down to the, I mean, you know, like there's all sorts of little quirky little things that could be pedestrian only that actually makes the connectivity, or, you know, I don't know, I love that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know, but I think that's sort of part of the story, isn't it?
There's a number of businesses on Markham Street that require access for vehicles, and I'm not advocating for them, but you know, there's the glass, there's the panel beater, there's the
Scaffolding.
there's Burke, obviously,
Pest control.
there's Chorus, who can get very towy about closing that street at all. So what you've got is quite a mixed use. It's not a retail zone. It's you know, there's one residential property there. So I think, you know, number one, you've got to work with those business owners, because it's a very mixed zone. And it's the same with, you know, I mean, all there actually, we've got a mix with panel beaters on the main street, tractor yards, and you know, and
We're a
that's
service town there.
And that's
Yes.
and so unless you can provide something for those people that you're proposing to shift, and good luck, you know, because they'll all be wedded to their place. Unless you've got something concrete to offer them, it's going to be quite an expensive proposition to shift that, and you might be better just to figure out what works about that location for the existing businesses and do more of that.
Because if they're talking about beautifying it for the times that it's used and as a central role, you know, it doesn't have to be shut down. It could just be, you know, if you want, but I don't know that it's going to even be suitable to be the heart, centre of the town. Markham Street, to be fair.
I think it's a combination of the fact that people are holding on to the historic, I mean, it's got, you know, those buildings which are quaint and have history. A combination of that with the feeling that, you know, a lot of people have said that there isn't a heart or a core or a district area or a place, a hub. And I think people are, you know, we look at Markham Street to create that for us, but I don't necessarily think that's the answer. And I think it's working with what it is at the moment, and it could be reducing the speed limit and maybe planting a few trees, putting in a park bench and some lights. I mean, you know, and looking at doing a hub, perhaps as Judith has suggested elsewhere. But it's making the most of what we've got now. It's working for the businesses that are there. It's beautifying it for the residents and the people that use Markham Street, but it's still being utilised for the transport trucks that need to access it. Pedestrian, or whatever it is. Removing cars from it would be nowhere big enough for it, and it would kill. It would just be the death.
I just imagine what it would do to Douglas Road as well, which is residential up to there with the traffic movement.
So do you end up with putting them together or not putting them together?
I think they do.
But
They have to go together. You
They can't
can't,
have one yet, yeah, they, I mean, they might come back and say, this is, cannot see a concept of this being pedestrian only.
Yeah.
This is, but these are our alternates. I mean, I guess that's what an even design is gonna be.
Yeah, I guess
Go
we've
look
given
at
the
this.
scope of what we
Yeah.
want them to look at for
Yeah.
us as well, and,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think you've got number 12 in you as well, right? So isn't that part of the whole?
Yeah.
They need to be thinking about what focus points there are. I don't know what the right language is, but surely a community hub is part of
Yeah.
a concept plan. Master plan, I mean. The other thing you've got in there is, or down below the discussion points. Is the community hub part of this or a separate project? And that was the library extension. I mean, I think that's something that needs to be additional as a specific thing. I don't know what South Wall Council is saying. The library extension from memory was in year 10. But wouldn't the community hub be more urgent or more closer than that? Or at least something
Might
we
not
should
be
be planning
affordable,
for at
maybe.
least, because that would mean we'd have to go to the LTP again in 3 years, wouldn't it? I'd rather, or not rather, I don't think there should be choice. I think it'd be quite good if we consulted on both of those, certainly on the community hub in 3 years' time. I don't
can
know.
I ask a dumb question? What's meant by a community hub? What are you having? What is it?
So I guess it's a space for, it doesn't sound like a very good description of space for the community.
Yeah, I'm asking, what is it there?
I guess like, it's a big
Meeting rooms,
it's
Yeah,
a go-to
yeah.
place, somewhere central.
lounge area, kitchen.
Lounge area, kitchen, potential for an art show,
Museum.
potential for a
Conference
small
rooms.
movie theatre for, you know, a place where teenagers, young people could gather and, you know, under some supervision, but have activity and so on. I don't think it's as big as a bowling alley or something like that, but it's all sorts of stuff like that. There were aspects of this that were actually in the library's LTP submission of how they wanted the $2.4 million room used. It referred to community gathering, community centre, and it referred to art display, I think, from memory. So to me, that they, you know, one or the other, or they're all part of the same new piece of consultation at some point sooner than 10 years' time, I guess.
Yeah, I thought that
Very
library
good.
submission was really good because they said, actually, if you separated out all of the functions that happen, all the things that, activities that happen at the library that are not actually purely library related, a lot of that could go into a nearby community hub. And your need then for more library space might be different or smaller because you've got the library being a bit more purely library.
Correct. It could be that the RSA room actually becomes part of the community hub, which frees up that space within the library.
That's right. I mean, if you looked at that more creatively, you could have, I don't know, I guess you hold your community committee or South Wall committee meetings and stuff here, do you?
Yes.
Like you could, I would see that as also being a suitable meeting space, so that if you had Zoom and, you know, those fibre sorts of capabilities and lots of PowerPoints, you know, you could do a bunch of stuff there.
So-
that would free up overutilised facilities that have gone there because that was the only place that was sort of vaguely suitable, rather than something that's a bit more purpose-built. Because your tin shed's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
But so a smaller
It's not
space.
homely.
Yeah,
It's
more homely.
it's a great space, but it's not,
It could be better.
yeah, it's fabulous for, you know, when it was built and in its time, but it doesn't have the homeliness.
Dave and then Vanessa.
I've said it before, why do we have to own these buildings? If we're gonna build a community hub in 10 years' time, it's probably a good place to have it in 10 years' time. But I'm a real betting man that, you know, you've got a Westpac Bank that's next door, and I guarantee it's not gonna be there in how many years, because that's just on the model of what's happening throughout the whole country. So again, if you're gonna have maybe it's a conversation for another period, someone might build a building and you can lease a building. You know, there's a lot of businesses don't own the building, so there's something wrong in the model of that if we're gonna Hamish and if you want these facilities in the building blocks that someone builds it and you lease it or rent it. The problem is we don't have money to do these things.
And one thing with Highbury Library. And we've been recently for a meeting, and it's cool, super impressed with how they've accommodated meeting space, the library, you know, a little museum on the side, which is brilliant.
Oh, where was this one?
Highbury Library. So I was there for a meeting upstairs and it had a little museum on the side, which was brilliant. A little gallery space where a lady was in there taking down artwork and putting up another one, there were kids running around. The space was.
How many thousand people live in Cornwall?
I'm using it as an example.
How many people live in Cornwall?
Of what a community
Just an
space might
example
be.
of how it can work with a library.
Super impressed. It doesn't need to be on a massive scale, it doesn't need to be flash, but the concept, and somehow, you know, we talk about having a community hub as separate from the library, somehow, to me, they all seem, they should kind of all be in one space.
And that's fine, all I meant was, let's plan them at the same time or in parallel, so that we make the best use of resources.
And you had all these different demographics and they're all at the same time, it had like this beating heart to it, I was really impressed with them.
If you ever get the chance to go through Ashburton, you need to go into their new three-story building. It is the space for their community services, it is their library, and all of the other allied services that are available from the hub kind of perspective. There is rooms for young children to be read stories with their families. There is a space where there's computers for you know, young people come in. They've never had so many young people come into the library space. They have a room that's got a laser cutter, whatever, 2 sewing machines that the members of the community can come in, and all they need to do is get the staff member to take the sewing machine down off the shelf, and members of the community can use it. Like, honestly, that place was humming. It was absolutely just an inspiring.
It's got a recording studio.
Yeah.
It's the council offices and council chambers.
On the 3rd floor.
And all of that for only $64+ million. So
Is it 13?
63, and they got
last depends who you talk to.
20 million from the government, and the rest the ratepayer is thumping up for. But you need to go and feel, because everything that you've talked about, I think, you know, Vanessa and Karen, you know, the hub, you know, they've never had so many young people come in to use that space than they've ever had in their previous example, because of the environment that they have created in the incredibly well, just the whole build has just been incredibly well thought out. You know, there's a children's playground outside, and so, you know, it honestly, it is a work of art. You need, if you're ever going past, you need to go have a wee look.
There's an old building inside the building.
Yeah.
Inside the library,
Wow.
built over.
So it was a heritage building.
We wonder why we ever got rid of our historic town hall.
The only thing I
We
would
could have
say,
renovated it, bloody thing.
we've just angst for ages over how much we were going to spend in rates, so I'm all for if we can find somebody that's interested in taking on some of that. I think that we need to do this work. I think we have to be clever about it, but I don't think we'll achieve anything if we haven't done the groundwork and had a look at what we want. We're not then set up to take advantage of the opportunities of somebody that comes along. So I totally agree with doing a lot of this work, and we'll see what we come up with what suits. We're a slightly different demographic in some ways than other areas. We've got that higher senior need, and I know that a lot of the services that have been offered out in the library there that could be over and something like that have been well utilised by that age group. We may have a slightly different demographic on our young numbers of young people, but anything that encourages them to come and mix in the same spaces as some of the older people, brilliant. So I say we need to go ahead and.
Yes, to come back to your master plan. The master plan is the time to set a bit of visionary blueprint.
Yeah.
Nothing says it's going to happen, but if we don't put it in that sort of blueprint, we may not have the chance to dare to dream. So I guess to come back to it, we need to put it in that paper copy, because that will feed into ability or doability in that scope, you know, and it probably needs to incorporate everybody's thinking in that on the piece of paper, and once we see it, we'll be able to like.
Starts with a vision.
Yeah.
Starts with a vision.
Yeah.
Good for the community to see that too. I think it's encouraging and.
And as it goes further on, we're also talking about affecting the district plan, aren't we? Because that's how you control it. You have bits of drawings and things shoved in shelves about ideas, but some of that is about adjusting the district plan to push people in that direction. Because unless we put some of those sorts of things in, that's why we often get led by development. Somebody comes along and they want to change the thing because there's no land available to do this, so they pick a paddock out in the middle of somewhere and they've got a heap of money and they find it. So part of this is making those adjustments in the district plan to allow for them to try and direct that so that we don't spend our time defending our decisions on. That's part of that picture as well.
Sorry, I missed that.
I can, but I'll take you out the back of later and give you a one-on-one session.
Are we making sense to you, Nicola?
Sorry,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Robbie.
One thing it's nice to do, one thing we need to do is to come up with something that's achievable. I remember that process, Gavin, 20 years ago, the old RSA, everyone got little stickers and put things on maps, and it was actually crystal clear what the town wanted. It was there wasn't a lot of ambiguity about it all. But then a plan got produced out of that, which had some good ideas, but it had things, for example, like GBT and Ambly Truck and Road weren't there, and there was a playground. And I thought, but you sort of think, yeah, right. Did you ask them? You know, I think in a 10-year period or whatever, good to actually get, because that one sort of fizzed away. I don't know too many things, but a streets game came out of it. But I sort of thought, you know, a lot of work went in, and then after that. So I think it's better to come up with a plan that gets some good results and opens up some avenues for bigger projects later or whatever. But we don't want to come up with something that's just a wee bit too out there and most likely isn't going to happen.
A mixed use. So we have got on the maps, there's a mixed use sort of zone that picks out Markham Street, Main Road, and where the community hub and the library, etc. So in terms of the district plan, that would be through zoning.
Right.
Change that to mixed use, so mix of.
Allows for all things.
Yeah.
Residential.
Yeah.
Retail. So you're talking about putting in a bigger expanded area of that mixed use, or that's all currently mixed use?
Well, I think consolidating the zoning, so it is a mixed use zone. But I think what we're hearing is that we look at the town centre stuff, being the library, community hub, Brackenfield, along with Markham Street and the state highway. It has to be considered as a group.
Yeah.
The feeling that I've always got with Markham Street has been around sort of the old town feel.
Yeah.
And it's almost, I think Adelaide and places like that, they've got places where they're tourist attraction in their own right sort of thing, but they're almost weekend spots as opposed to being full go all week, because during the week stock trucks and everything wrecking up and down there and everything else. So ultimately, in Ambly, I kind of agree with Judith, but really ultimately there's going to be a decision between the two. Unless Ambly's big enough that it can sustain an old town with you know things that you put in the old town history and all the rest of it, or whether or not it's going to ultimately come down to one or the other, that the town centre, if you like, develops on one side of the road or the other. Otherwise, you run the risk of, to me, Rangiora is a disaster. It's got 3 centres with 3 hubs, and you can't go anywhere between shops without having to get back in your car and drive. So ultimately, it probably will come down to one or the other, unless a really big Reefton brewery or someone set up a Market Street and attracted all the others around them and said, right, over there that weekend, that type of spot. Otherwise, we'll probably spread a bit thin. So relocating from there, somebody spent an awful lot of money making alternative places to them go, and not one of them was shifted. So it's not that easy, just doing that sort of thing.
See, I don't agree, actually, sorry, but I don't see it as an or, I see it as an and. Because
If we're big enough, yeah.
how's Markham Street, I mean, we're going to have some other form of residential, retail office hub development here somewhere. So I think always see Markham Street as just being uniquely what it is. There's not ever going to be a hell of a lot more buildings that are going to go on in Markham Street. So there's going to have to be some other retail development elsewhere, which we can characterise with some kind of design standards too, so that it sort of supports Markham. I don't see it as an or, I see it as an and.
I agree with your services and your office, that type of thing, but to have sort of a shopping area there and a shopping area there in the future, with the state highway going between them, that's a big ask, unless they can stand on their own. They can get by with half of what comes through, sort of thing.
I guess that this conversation though is not what we can resolve today. So getting a little bit off track, today is about this document, the spatial plan, looking at the feedback and saying, having looked at the feedback, what do we want to change, if anything, in the spatial plan? And then there's some actions. So I think that needs to be the focus on what we're talking about today.
So there's a bit of feedback on the industrial land.
Yes, there was a bit there.
I think keep moving through.
Yeah, all right.
So question 4.
Question 4. So question 4 was around industrial growth. So when we had the economic background report done, that identified that we in the quite near future had a deficit of industrial zone land. So through the draft spatial plan, it's been signalled to rezone land to the southwest of Amberley. So it's the land that adjoins Grays Road. So do it on here. So yeah, got State Highway, sort of where the purple line is, and then Grays Road coming along there. So proposing that, so we've got the existing industrial zone land down here where the transfer station is, and extending that zoning sort of westwards that way. So through the feedback received on that, probably that, so there was the usual comments around the impacts on the road infrastructure, Grays Road, the intersection with the State Highway, and probably the biggest, I'd say the bulk of the feedback concerned the rezoning of this area of 58 Grays Road, particularly coming from some of these adjoining residential property owners. So yeah, looking for some direction from the councillors today on whether we should retain the indicated industrial zone on 58 Grays Road, or whether, based on the feedback, we might look to remove that zoning, so then we'd retain the zoning on the other side of the Kauai River. But yeah, potentially whether we retain this bit or not. I guess again, this is a high level strategic indication of rezoning. To actually rezone the land, there would be a plan change process to the district plan, where I guess all the more specific things on the residential property could be better further considered through that process. But yeah, whether at that sort of, I guess, strategic level, we should be indicating the rezoning of that block of land.
Nicola, how many residential properties will be affected, or how many are we talking about?
So there are, but should do it that way. I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but there are a number of residential properties that do back on. So yeah, there's kind of the terrace, and that's all residential.
Many of them are on long driveways off
Yeah.
Carter's Road.
Yes.
Yeah, and then they're up there on the sort of the edge of the bank with nice views and so on.
And they'll look out that way, won't they, actually?
And a number of them have fed back with less than support because of the potential for noise and so on and so forth.
They are quite large.
How does it fit in with floodplain?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
So so that would have to be considered through, I guess, further investigation into it.
Like, we're not putting up an option to them saying, what do you think about that? Well, maybe it could or couldn't happen anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't generally think that being in the flood zone would necessarily be the ending point to using that land, but it would require further, I guess, due diligence in going through that process, and it might just restrict, it might be that, you know, putting stormwater in there is not gonna work, or it has to be slightly lower density, or there'd be ways and means in terms of that development, because I know the rest of the industrial zones within the flood assessment and the Glen is that bit further away from the river, but that has all been sort of, that is being developed for industrial purposes.
Nicola, if we left it in this, because this is a strategic document, it's not a document that's going to mandate anything other than a thinking document, isn't it really? If we left it in and someone come along and wanted to do something outside of what was indicated in the current district plan, they would need to go through all of those gateways to get a district plan review to rezone it to be residential or whatever else it might be. So we could leave it, I'm just putting this up as a straw man, we could leave it in here because it's really only a strategic document, you know, and if someone came along and said, I really want to put residential down on Grace Road, but it's now industrial or vice versa, because that's outside of the district plan rules, they'd have to go through all of that RMA sort of gateway to be able to facilitate their dream, I guess. So
yeah,
you know, is there anything, I guess what I'm thinking is there anything wrong with keeping it there?
Yeah.
What do we say to the people that have taken the time to give us feedback?
Yeah.
And say, we don't want it there.
Yeah, well, I'm just putting it up as a straw man. I think there is quite a sway towards that, but you know, at the end,
because we're considering everybody's feedback. So we'll have to go back to each person. It's just the same as the long-term plan type process, and say thank you for your feedback. These are the decisions that have been made in relation to the spatial plan. So I think it's really important not to lose sight of each. There's a risk with looking at just simply in the summary format that you lose sight of each individual submission.
Just tell them to move it to.
And the other issue here, sorry, Murray, is the fairly strong feedback from the landowner. Which I've noted. As well as the residents up on the top of the ridge.
White track through it. At the moment, you're not going to get white track through it.
But because the other side of this discussion, I guess, and I've had a couple of residents raise it with me in terms of concern about the Grace Road site, but speaking to a preference for the Lawcox Road site, which is where that other industrial graphic is on the other side of the Kowai, the south side of the west side of the Kowai, which is where Fitch's is today, and the first of those storage sheds and so on. And that, to me, I mean, is an equally possible industrial zone, and because it's on a sealed road, so that, you know, it's got the advantage of over Grays Road in that sense. It's on the main road to Rangiora, and therefore traffic routes and so on and so forth.
Actually, that's a good idea. It could also incorporate offices and.
It could be, quite an interesting, I guess, commercial development there, because it's already started.
It's probably highly productive there too.
Well, it probably is. So I mean, again, they're all in that same, I guess, in that same.
But it's away
space,
from
but-
residential to some extent.
It just worries me, the message you send out putting buildings in a flood zone. We're the council, and we talk about climate change and all this stuff, and we've got to be resilient. Then we plan to put industrial in a flood zone. What will they get insurance? Will they get?
But if we can't put them in a highly productive land, because that's kind of what they've done at Kaipoi, isn't it? Along the side of the river.
I thought, is this just within the town boundary we're talking? We're not considering options.
No, so this is all rezoning new land, so that black line is the current town boundary. So, yeah, this is all looking outside. Again, we'd have to jump through the tests of the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, because as it's been said, that's all highly productive land out that way as well.
But we do have the report saying that there's a shortfall coming up more quickly, so it's different to residential. There's a shortfall.
So where does this fit? We've had an update for a wee while. For example, our other straw man, we've been talking about over the years of the industrial or have been further afield, or if somebody was to buy a paddock where big industrial picture is on the west side of the road, down Grays Road, up on the, or something like that, would they just have to apply to change the plan or to add it to, or to whatever? Does it exclude everything else, or are we just saying we've got that boundary to put it in, it's got to go somewhere in there?
Yeah, so we've not shown hard lines on the spatial plan, so it's all sort of a bit indicating a direction of growth. So we're not saying, but we have indicated, I guess, that it would be coming off that Grays Road area. We have looked at the Lawcox Road, but again, you've got the school on the corner, you've got the residential areas, and if you're having sort of heavy vehicle movements coming to the industrial area, whether that's where we want more trucks coming, as opposed to sort of down on Grays Road, which yes would require roading upgrades to facilitate.
Would that include the bridge down there? Because that's a one-way.
Yeah, it
bridge on the
would need,
bend, isn't it?
it would need some quite substantial.
We've already got trucks on Lawcox Road there today. There's a lot of trucks using that
Yeah,
road.
yeah.
A lot of stock trucks using that route, a lot of milk tankers. Logging trucks, milk tankers already using Lawcox Road.
But I suppose it's a
Right,
case
but
of
there's
doing
increased numbers, but they're already using it.
And then if they're using it, are they then using Douglas Road or Markham Street? Because that just plays into.
They're using Markham, that's the route,
yeah.
they use Markham.
Yeah.
Street, up Lawcox Road, past the, round past the pub and then left into Markham Street and out to State Highway 1 or vice versa.
So we need to take it out, we need to take it out.
Yeah.
The context of that, of 58 Grays Road coming in was its proximity to the transfer station and potential expansion. Wasn't it? That was why it jumped the river.
So some of it is already there, you know, Jimmy Elliott's bit there, or with beside the land, there is gaps in now, so do you need to indicate at this stage that, oh, we need all that bit right around under the houses on the terrace, or is there, with the demand that's been in the last 20 years, have we got enough to cope at the moment already or not?
you don't need 58 Grays Road for capacity because it's large land holding to the west of, so if you think about the land between Lawcox and Grays, and probably as part of any rezoning plan change, you would look at that whole area and costs and benefits of where the zone goes. We don't need that 58 Grays Road from a capacity point of view.
And as I say, I don't think we've got any further movement on the straw man concept that we've been talking about over the years, but I know that was when we looked at these maps initially, we were sort of asking people, how do you feel about somewhere a bit north or whatever? Did you get any kind of anything come out of it?
So when we first, on the first iteration of maps, when we went out to the first round of engagement, we did indicate a industrial area to the north of Amberley. It wasn't connected to the township, it would have been, I guess, a separate area. So part of the idea of why that area was proposed was because it wasn't on the most highly productive land that just sits out of the title. Yeah, the most highly productive land that sort of borders the township. It was kind of on the next tier down. We did receive a lot of feedback around having that when we've got sort of the viticultural area and the impact of that on, I guess, the image of that and the tourism and that wider area. I guess there was also, if you got it to the north, there's already complaints around all the heavy vehicle movements through the state highway. That would potentially mean more heavy vehicles through the state highway. Yeah, I can't quite remember the finer points of the discussion, but it was discussed and decided to sort of extend out that the existing Grays Road.
It's the sort of thing, what you're talking about shifting really is if you're going to think, well, where would Mr. Ravensdown or Mr. Firth or somebody like that, Mr. Balance, or how would they look plonked down there, or what sort of place would they, you know, they don't need to be in the main street, or they don't, all that sort of shop frontage thing. So, but you've got a picture, well, where would you plonk them? Because today,
the national policy statement on highly productive land, was that set to change or be tweaked or when the new government came in? I had a feeling that something was discussed about it.
They've talked about removing the LUC3 land from the policy, so it wouldn't apply to the LUC3 land. I'm not sure that that's progressed.
Yeah.
It certainly hasn't come in the latest round of reforms. I think it's still on the table.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
You got a problem, once you've divided into lifestyle blocks, you got a not in my backyard scenario. If you look at Rolleston, they've sort of, one part they've actually got right, isn't it? They've got their industrial land out to the side, and it's actually growing. You know,
beside the railway line.
You know, I like to challenge it as highly productive land. It's only highly productive land if it's got water. It ain't got water, so that's not that productive. And you can't get rid of the nutrients because every other
Wakanui type soil. We will need the plan change out here for some of the highest productive land.
Well, you've let it go into subdivision, so that's gone. So that industrial land from Lawcox Lane, can it go across but be a bit further out from the town? It's got to be on flat. It's got to be on. You need a vision that's going to be big enough and far enough away. And
if you think about Lawcox Road today, and as you go down Lawcox Road, you turn left into where Fitch is and the new storage shed, and then there's an old house there sitting up by the road, and then it's all open flat land from there looking south. And I guess in the back of my head, if you think of Rangiora and Flaxton Road or whatever, and that sort of industrial and commercial development, you could easily take a road turning left off Lawcox, heading south into that open flat land, turn it with a developer doing it, turn it into a big industrial and commercial subdivision with Ravensdown and whoever else down there, the traffic would turn left off Lawcox to go into it, or you'd have to widen Lawcox and the traffic lane or whatever, but it would work.
And
It's
then
out of sight, it's not.
at the same time, have your bypass past the town, you know, your truck bypass showing like, well, our gentleman said today, I don't know where you would think the bypass of the town is for the heavy vehicles.
Just bear in mind, one thing that we are trying to do is, because we've got the school at the top of Lawcox and on Douglas, and the long-term goal would be to try and get trucks away from the school.
Yeah.
So how is there any plan for the bypass? You know.
No, it's a state highway though, so how do you get trucks away from it?
How do you bypass the whole Amberley? There is no plan.
Dan explained all that before, where he was talking about depending on whether the truck stop goes on the corner of Grays Road, it would either be a Grays Road option or a reserve road option, isn't that what you said?
Mount Brown Reserve.
Yeah. So they're the two options for heavy vehicle bypass.
And it's whether or not, if you were to use the option that you were talking about, Gary, is that, yeah, by all means, come up Lawcox, go into that area, but when you come out, you're not coming out through Amberley, you're going back out Reserve Roadway, because we don't want you coming past the school.
Okay, understand, okay, and I hadn't thought that either.
But if that road was all developed and they could just easily get onto the reserve and go all the way down to the back of the then that's great.
Well, for Crossing, you put a road west of the railway line along there so that either way you're not, you're out of town.
Maybe, I'm looking at you, Murray, as the chair, maybe this is an item that needs to maybe go back and a little bit more brainstorming between the planners and you know, Dan and Judith, and come back to us with whatever the.
I'm going to have to raise something, and it is, I'm digressing, but you know, we're so concerned about the traffic outside the Amberley School that we're not worried. Is anyone worried about the trucks that hurtle past Broomfield at over 100k and never slow down? I mean, at least when they're coming past this school, they're starting to brake and they're getting ready to stop.
They're doing 50k as well.
But at Broomfield School, it's a massive issue. I see it every day.
Well, I think so we don't go down that rabbit hole. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, but we're really into sort of problem solving. And that's not the purpose of the workshop. So yes, I think your suggestion, Gary, is, I mean, we can also show a little industrial zone up by Lawcox Road, so we can identify that whole area as a potential industrial zone that needs further exploration. And some of that is dependent on what happens with the truck stop and the work that Dan's doing, to sort of line that up, and then we, you know, we come back, but this is still just very much a spatial plan.
Understand.
So I think but I think what the decision you do need to make is whether that one there, that Nicola's going round and round on, whether that's in or out, and that's in the flood zone, adjacent to the residential area, around the transfer station, is there in or out? So I think that's a decision you do need to make.
It's out. And I think directionally what we're saying is the industrial zone will be to the west or south side of the Kauai River.
And so if we needed to expand the transfer station?
There is.
You have to go up on top of the terrace.
I'm just thinking ahead, so you know, do we need to rezone now?
We're not talking about rezoning, we're just showing indicative industrial industrial spaces. So if the feedback is not supportive of any further development in that area, then I mean, it doesn't stop the council applying for a resource consent to expand the transfer station. We're saying for the purpose of the spatial plan, we're not supporting any further
new development.
No, new development, new industrial development in the lower part of terrace.
And the submissions very much.
There are lots of reasons why we should take it out, but then there's also some really good reasons in here why it's a good place as well. And I'm still struggling, I'm happy to go.
We're retaining Nicola Dunn,
Yeah, with that other one, that's,
down across.
yeah,
That whole area.
Up
Yeah.
down to
Yeah.
Retaining all of
Balcony.
that.
yeah, oh, then take it out.
It's not to say it can't happen, it's just that it's not, he's not acting on that strategic
Yeah.
matter. Nicola?
Alright, so, yeah, based on that, we will remove, from 58 Grays Road, then we'll add another symbol up here. So the wider area between Lawcox Road and Grays Road is subject to investigation for industrial use.
And it's all right from one road to the other, so it keeps options on both roads open.
Yeah.
Over that side here. So that what's already in there, the picture of the, it's a reading, is it? We've already got a chunk there, isn't it?
That's the transfer station.
Yeah, but beside there, there's, below Gold Pine, and Jeff's got a bit where he's built, there's existing space here that there's still a bit of room to grow in there already, isn't there?
There's an empty
And then
site.
does it
There's an
go-
empty site there along the road.
An empty
so-
site there with chairs, but then, I don't know how far we go around, whether it'd be boundary John Shepard's, I suppose, but whether or not you gave yourself an area along the bridge up the front, but not tucked around under the residential houses are looking down on
Well, John Shepherd was one of the submitters that
I
was
can imagine.
vehemently opposed
it.
to retaining that under that terrace.
Yeah.
And I know we're in workshop, but I mean, I'm gonna rally that's put his name up on one of those as well, just putting it up there.
I guess it is too.
Well, I suggest we stop for 10 minutes, get a cup of tea, bathroom, sandwich. And then, so back at 10 past, and then you'll keep moving.
I'll apologise, I'm gonna need to go at about 20 to 4.
Yeah, we'll try and keep moving.
I think we've done more substantial sections now.
What have we got left?
So around improved connectivity and enhanced environment. So I think we're done, we're done all of these issues like that. Out of the district. On the draft spatial plan, we showed future transport opportunities, both rail and bus, future active transport opportunities improvements. Actually, it might be easier if I. So the future active transport opportunities and improvements were these sort of dotted purple, dashed purple lines. traffic and safety improvements at intersections with the state highway, and amenity improvements along the state highway through Amberley. And so again, we asked respondents about how they felt about the proposed opportunities and improvements. So the feedback on public transport was generally supportive. But again, like a lot of the things that we asked, you get some respondents who consider that we still need continued discussion around whether it's public transport's required, and I guess whether the numbers stack up, while others consider that the spatial plan doesn't assign sufficient urgency to public transport. In terms of, I guess, active transport connectivity, generally again, that was pretty positive. Mostly the written comments around that were just additional suggestions of things that we hadn't shown on our draft spatial maps. So one of those additional suggestions was forming, I should put the maps up, the proper maps up in the break. So one of those suggestions was forming the unformed section of Hursley Terrace Road to provide a connection from the end of Webbs Road to Amberley Beach Road. So we've got Webbs Road going down here, and there's an unformed legal road parcel that runs along here where the ready-mix site is. Yeah, thank you. Along there, saying that should be considered. Another said that we hadn't, well, they suggested a walkway along the eastern drain. So I do note that with the Takawa subdivision there, we did create a linkage towards the eastern drain there, providing provision if there was to be a future walkway along the eastern drain. There was also comments around state highway safety. So again, when you bring up this question, you get various suggestions and concerns around people's perception of safety on the state highway and specific examples of where speed limits need to be moved. So I guess a bit more detailed than where we are for the spatial plan, which is more strategic. Again, the bypass comes up, and the idea of a pedestrian overbridge. So somebody suggested a statement piece with a design competition and philanthropic investors. And then, yeah, there's a few more. Yeah, somebody who didn't want planning for the state highway, so it's a good wide road with good visibility. So that's the summary. Did anybody have particular thoughts or concerns with that feedback?
I do guess just kicking the ball off, and in terms of some of those submissions and the direction of them, I would fully support them in the sense of we are getting consistent and constant feedback around issues, growing issues at at intersections, left turns, right turns, traffic volumes, pedestrian traffic getting across, even at the road safety advisory committee, every meeting that I've chaired, however many that is, Mari, Anthony Cridlington, the principal of the Amberley School, who's the school's representative on the road safety committee, just continues to emphasize the need for safe pedestrian crossing of State Highway 1. Because a lot of the school pupils now live over there. He's encouraging them to walk to school because that's what we should be doing, but they've got to get across State Highway 1. So where I'm coming from, coming out of the feedback, I think we need to give serious consideration to the idea of, is it a pedestrian overbridge or is it a pedestrian walk? I don't know what it is, but pedestrian flow across State Highway 1, intersection improvements, both in terms of Markham Street and State Highway 1, and there is going to be a major catastrophe one day outside the Blue Dairy in terms of the way that traffic all works. It's not only the fact that it's 2 offset roads against State Highway 1. With the post shop over there and someone comes out, but I know they're gonna turn into Douglas and someone's already moving. And then the wide car parking area outside the Blue Dairy is a growing problem of people who are driving in there or parking on the wider area with their big B-train truck, which blocks views. To me, State Highway 1, and if that means we somehow have to get with NZTA and really see what can be done, I think that's a huge priority. And to me, the submissions in the spatial plan, you know, emphasize all of that.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry it takes so long, yeah.
That's all right, if I may. So I guess at a strategic level where we're at, so we're currently showing, there's a big purple line, the length of the state highway through Amberley, that's indicating both streetscape beautification and safety improvements along State Highway 1. Along with that, in the action plan, we have an action around advocating to NZTA for road safety improvements for our community. Is that, I guess, sufficient for the spatial plan?
I think it's sufficient for the spatial plan, but I think the onus is on us as council and Amberley representatives to then push and take that further, more than just the high level sitting in a spatial plan.
What are the steps you need to do to look at an approach on under one, or, you know, like pedestrian access under or over State Highway 1?
That's a good question.
You do go check with NZTA.
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't be looking at an overpass, because if you look at the ageing demographic of Amberley and the difficulty of getting up and over.
Up a big ramp.
Yeah, so the underpass is probably the preferred option.
Yeah.
And it'd be about having a conversation with them, because we probably expect them to fund the lion's share of it. But I mean, I use the cycleway down the motorway a lot, and there's all the underpasses through there, and they're really, really well engineered, but really well engineering comes with some with a very high cost. And when they built those, they built them under a greenfields situation. We've got all manner of services under the road, so it certainly probably is the preferred option, but the cost of it would be very sizable.
And it would need to go through the RLTP process, or how would we, what would be the best way to facilitate it?
Well, a bit like what we do with Conway Bridge, is to start the conversation, start banging the drum and saying it needs to be done. It needs to be done, you know. It's not through Amberley's fault. It's more and more that now level 2 highway, more and more traffic's coming up through it. It's becoming impassable. It's not Amberley's fault that that's happening.
No, and it will be exacerbated, likely to be exacerbated with the Woodend bypass, because people will be travelling faster for longer, and we will be at their bell curve. So, I mean, I have had that first discussion with James Cable, but, you know, do we need to formally, from this information, take that in a different, he would still be our first person?
That's what I wonder, whether we should start making formal representations. I mean, I think there's no doubt that we need something to get people from one side to the other safely. In the school, clearly it's a big issue for them twice a day. And for older people, I mean, I know myself, even trying to get across the road is a nightmare, let alone trying to drive, you know, like trying to do right from here out.
Perhaps we should invite James Cable to our council.
Well, the other thing is, we've got a really good submission from the Ministry of Education, who make note of that. And it's quite clear that there isn't any plans for, you know, that there's capacity over here, so they're not going to put another primary school in. So, you know, they understand that difficulty as well.
So I think when we look at these transport issues, rather than just watch someone out and have a chat, we need to put a plan in place. And there needs to be a step in the plan, because to achieve these things takes long-term pressure and quite a lot of it.
And
well,
let's start.
How much money you've set aside for it as well, because they're not going to fund the whole lot. So, I think you need, there's a piece of work, if that's something you really want to achieve, and there's quite a lot of work to do. And, start by putting a plan together for.
So, if not traffic lights, and is that more practical, because the cost of an underpass might be more.
Yeah.
Well, and at the traffic lights is actually gonna solve two issues, and especially if the traffic lights are in sequence. But, again, I'm not an engineer, they horrendous amount of money too, like if you had a set of traffic lights down by countdown, and
Yes, they are, but you won't be paying for them.
And that's the thing, is when you say,
so would that be a better option from a council's viewpoint?
In my view, but if you want an underpass, then
it's not about what we want, we just want to say across.
we've gone from inviting James Cagle out from meeting to talk about an underpass.
Yeah, no, well, I'm just
I think we're just
practical
throwing some
solution.
ideas around.
Yeah. We just want a safe crossing.
So what I'm trying to think is like Fitzgerald Avenue's got hundreds of cars going down there, and it's reasonably painless to drive down Fitzgerald Avenue in town, because can we do a similar type of thing here?
So if we want traffic lights, do we want them to provide a crossing for pedestrians?
Correct.
So pedestrian lights like they have in Woody.
Yeah.
Or are we looking for intersection traffic lights to make it easier for a certain amount of traffic to get out onto the main road?
Both.
That's
what-
you can, but I'm saying you need to define what you want first before you start putting pressure on people to say, we want this.
Well, that's why I brought up the traffic lights, is to give an option, because then it was solving two problems. And the traffic lights might be getting the people to the centre of the road to a safety zone for a second part, I don't know.
And is
Mind mapping.
Is he not the person that actually would bounce some ideas off and then define a pathway from there?
And he might say, oh no, what about this instead?
But in all the conversations, well, I've had, I suppose, they've never been a fan of traffic lights because they don't want to slow the traffic down.
But
Yeah, but that's probably what's leveraged in some part of the bypass.
But would end to a degree, because it's a pedestrian traffic light rather than a traffic stopping traffic light. It's not so painful because it only goes off.
Understand.
Not so frequently and the specified times of the day when you know it's going to be a problem. So that's why maybe a person crossing traffic light is a simpler proposition than a crossing traffic light, because that goes constantly.
You go through Ashburton though, and those lights seem to work well there, how many of us have driven through State down there?
You're gonna put them in,
Timaru
surely
does
put them at an intersection, and you help the traffic and the pedestrians.
Okay, so what's our intersection?
Let's not try and solve this now, what's the action?
Yeah, thank you, Judith.
Mind mapping with James Cagle or whoever.
What were you gonna say, Nicola?
So I was going to say, yeah, good, but again, we can't solve that today. So in terms of the spatial plan, we currently have an action around council. So number 2, advocate and work with Waka Kotahi NZ Transport Agency for safety improvements to State Highway 1, in particular safety improvements with intersections with local roads in Amble and Leafield, and to improve pedestrian safety. What I'm getting potentially from the discussion we've had now is that it's not just advocating, it's actually council formulating a plan on how they're going to advocate and build their case so they can convince NZTA of our issues.
Because it's never going to sell.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there's been quite a bit of advocacy, like through your road safety structures and so on anyway, and we're still really no further ahead.
So just some stronger language on that. Action point 2.
Lots of residents have written as well, so I think we need a.
Well, we can now say we've had this many submissions on in relation, it's just more ammunition, and I like what you said, Pauline, about the MOE's position.
Yep.
One of the things about dealing with NZTA is you need to be able to bring long-term pressure to bear on the organisation, and that means you've got to be able to go wider than James, who's a single voice within the organisation, and actually get some traction in there, and that requires you to be consistent and to have a plan and stick to it. So if it says write the NZTA once a month, then you've got to make sure that somebody writes the NZTA once a month and that it actually happens.
Does Matt Ducey, the Assistant Minister of Transport,
Yep.
have a voice in all of this?
I'm sure that.
I'm just wondering if we can tap into him as a one.
And Stuart, even.
Sure that MPs will help, and Matt as Associate Minister, as you say, could be useful. But I also think that you've got to somehow get into the ears of the Wakatahi board.
Yeah.
And say to them, this is the problem in the town, talk to the organisation about it, or be aware of it. So I think you need a plan for who you're going to approach, how often you're going to approach them, whether you can create avenues for our residents to get into their ears as well, because they don't like that particularly.
Okay, so I think the action is that that's something that we'll work on and plan and bring that back to council for you to consider.
Great.
That's one of the actions.
Yeah.
Okay, in terms of the active transport, linkages indicated on the spatial plan. So yeah, as I said, general support. There were two specific suggestions that we aren't currently showing on the spatial plan. Whether there was any, whether councillors would like to see those added to the spatial plan as indicative potential active transport lines. So there's the one from connecting with the unformed legal road from Webbs Road to Amberley Beach Road, and then there was also one indicating along the eastern drain. With the one along the eastern drain, that's where we are indicating future growth outside the urban boundary. As part of rezoning for that growth, we would look to do an outline plan or a structure plan, which I imagine as part of that process, we would look to show some sort of walkway through there, but whether at this higher spatial plan level we want to show either of those linkages. Is there any direction on that today?
You know, what was the thinking behind the Hurst Terrace submission?
Which is, sorry.
Is it about forming Hurst Terrace to Webbs Road? What was the thinking behind that?
I'm guessing somebody wants to do a loop.
Shortcut to the beach.
Yeah, or they want to go, like maybe they live in Takawa, they want to go down Double Corner Road, Webbs Road, back along to Amberley Beach.
A bit of circle.
Yeah.
We've got no money for a
I don't see
road.
the point in, I don't see the point in highlighting that accessible at this stage. But I don't know whether high level or not, but would it hurt to perhaps make provision for the one up by Tukawa?
Certainly not. So yeah, we can have a little.
And as, you know, okay, they might want to drive around the circle, but they might be able to see that different one through the one you're looking at now. It's not quite as a compromise, but even as a walking track or an access through there might satisfy what they're after.
Do you think is it a safer access to the beach or at the the proposed cycle track might like it's more of the whole loop then?
I would say it's more of a loop because if we're indicating sort of improving the access along Amberley Beach Road, I'd say it's more just somebody wanting a loop. I can't remember the full context of that submission.
There's no compelling reason really to add it at the moment to our spatial plan, is there?
I think that probably covers off that section. And then that just leaves us with the last question, which was on enhanced environment. And so on the spatial plan, we've indicated maintenance improvements of existing parks and reserves, along with seeking opportunities for a new park in the northeast of Amberley, indicated some beautification opportunities within Leafield and Amberley. We've also indicated some waterway enhancements for ecological, recreational and flood protection purposes. So in terms of the feedback, I think it was noted before, it was generally supportive, but there were some respondents who did note the practical realities of street trees and plantings, in terms of, loss of sunlight, the mess of leaves, that kind of thing. Some people commenting on like that green spaces are a great feature of any livable town or city. Some noted that we already have 2 large recreational parks that are underutilised. Somebody did note that, so we've indicated improved wayfinding, sort of at the Amberley, each entry exit of Amberley, in terms of sort of tourism wayfinding. So somebody has suggested that it's a shame that we aren't showing anything for the Waipara wine region, as that's a significant draw for the Huranui. A few rats and mice. There's a few things in there that we can't do through the spatial planning process that are a bit detailed, such as around mandatory water storage for properties. And then I've also noted in my summary that any comments around the Eastern Reserve and dog parks has been provided to the reserves management plan process as did outline before. So is there any particular points of discussion that anybody wanted to raise on the enhanced environment part?
Yeah, Nicola, just the Stanton Road, and I know that purchase has just happened since this all went to print. So to me, that's actually has huge potential for enhancement of wetland and all sorts of recreation activities as well. So how do you feed that in now after we?
So we there's one of the changes that I have on another slide, is to so since we have engaged on this process, council has purchased the Stanton Road wetland, which holds quite a lot of potential in terms of ecological and recreational. So we did think it was worthwhile indicating that on the spatial plan for those 2 purposes. Quiet room is a good room. All right, so was there any other particular submission points that anybody noted that we haven't covered off already this afternoon that anybody wanted to raise for discussion?
If people go home and think, oh, damn, missed that piece, can they just feed into you?
They can, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep, good.
All right. So that probably brings us nicely to a question around what's next for the spatial plan process. Our aim has been to present the final spatial plan to the councillors at the 30th of July meeting. But one thing that we're wondering is how best to, so we've taken the Southwall Committee along on this journey with us. So yeah, we're keen today to get the councillors' thoughts on whether it was worth having a workshop with the Southwall Committee, or whether it was better that, or whether it was more an information thing, so providing a high level summary of the feedback received and the indicative direction of that, or whether I guess the other option is not providing anything to the Southwall Committee at this stage. So yeah, we're keen to get thoughts on sort of how best to take that next step.
I reckon because they've been involved all the way through, at least just giving them the information and that high level, even just what you've sent us, so that they can, you know, see the chain of thoughts, I guess, and the patterning within that.
I would agree. I don't think there's any need for a workshop at this
Yeah,
stage.
we don't need to regurgitate with the Southwood Committee. I
High
don't
level
think so.
summary would be fantastic.
Excuse me.
Give them a chance maybe to ask you,
Yes,
people there as we
yeah.
provide it to them prior, but if they've got questions, you might be there for that part of the meeting, which is next Wednesday night, to answer any questions, but they're not gonna relitigate the whole result.
Like we tried to do today, you mean?
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking about actually, you know, that actually, is there, I think we had the privilege of quite a bit of time to actually kind of go a bit wayward and then come back in again, you know, whereas it will be more difficult to do that in a South Ward, and I'm guessing it's going to happen inside a meeting as opposed to a workshop where you can have sort of, you know, somewhat loose discussion. So it'd be good for them to understand what has been considered and what is the pathway, and it's probably, this piece of paper is probably almost the most important to understand how their voices have been captured and what next is probably really important, I think, you know, because we sort of understand a little bit more, with all due respect to many of the, well, they've been on the journey, you know, it's been, you know, they're really busy as well, so just might need to make it so that they have a clear understanding.
Thank you. Thank you, Ruth.
Good on you, Pauline, thank you.
I think we've discussed the action plan. Oh, there was one more action. So, yeah. So in terms of the one for, no, so we just discussed around, I need to do it this way. We've discussed around advocating to NGTA. In terms of the third one, which is around advocating to environment category for public transport, proposing to take out the bit about undertaking a feasibility study and just leaving that at the moment to working with Environment Canterbury. Adding in a feasibility study at this stage is just adding in another cost and expense and another layer of trying to get things done. In terms of number 5, on reflection, determined that this action was better encapsulated in the action plan for the walking and riding strategy. So changing the wording to ensure that that is captured within the action plan for the walking and riding strategy rather than being an action specific to the spatial plan. We've discussed 11, 12 and 13. So I think based on that discussion, we'll have a re-look at those actions, but still maintaining the 3, I guess the 3 prongs of that overall town revitalisation, I don't know, want of a better word.
No, can I just come back to number 10?
Yeah.
I just see there, undertaking, first bullet point, undertaking a feasibility study to confirm the viability of indicated industrial. Are we actually going to do that? Are we going to do a feasibility study or is, or, you know, like I haven't heard that as our outcome today, that we're actually going to undertake a feasibility study. I thought we were just sort of shifting the industrial out of that flood zone for all of the logical, practical reasons and popping it over there in between Longcox and Greys.
Yeah.
So that's probably our outcome without launching into any feasibility. So I'm wondering whether that needs to be there.
Well, you do it as part of the preliminary planning, the plan change anyway. Sort of looking at you know, making sure at a high level that the costs and benefits were.
So we would still need a costed feasibility.
Perhaps not a feasibility study.
Yeah, so maybe we just need a bit of clarity around the
Yeah.
wording.
Well, we will have to complete section 32 analysis to do a plan change, so.
Yeah.
So that's captured in the second dot point, but we can make that a bit clearer if we perhaps consolidate those 2 dot points. So it doesn't seem like
Yeah,
a two-stage
two
process.
costs, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right,
Okay.
yeah. What, yeah, okay, makes sense to me. Yep.
I think on reflection there, when we reviewed the action plan, there was a lot of references to feasibility studies and further plans, and we wanted to change it to make it a bit more action focused rather than saying, well, we'll do yet another plan. Yeah.
Can I just ask, when we do something like this, it's like I said about the swings and slides going around, when we say, well, the industrial could go over there and it's cost better, how do we get on with the owner, the grocer's lucid or something, that, you know, like it doesn't affect anything that he's doing in the meantime or anything like that? Or,
No.
because are we talking about actually rezoning that thing now or leaving it open to the rezone sort of thing?
So through the spatial plan, we're indicating, we've given that a short-term, medium-term timeframe. So one of the other things I was hoping to discuss with you all today is whether there were any particular priorities within this action plan. In terms of, I guess, we have limited capacity, so what would be the best things to target first? In terms of that, it's always going to be easier if you've got the landowner on your side, because we can't make them develop their land. We can put a zoning on their property, but we can't force them to develop it for a specific purpose.
Yes, it doesn't suddenly, what's that? Significant thing where it doesn't suddenly mean that, righto, you now can't put your hay shed up within 500 metres of the boundary, or like sort of, it doesn't affect you in any other way.
I mean, like if we put new zoning and new rules on their property, that may affect what they can do, but in terms of them undertaking an existing operation, no, that shouldn't affect them, and I don't,
Yeah, I was horrified the other day. I was at Eagle Engineering in Whitebrook, for those of you who know where that was, is it Darnley Road, I think.
Yep.
And they said, well, that's still classified as State Highway 1. So no one can build within so far of it. Well, everyone's been down there knows it's a dead end, but it's not State Highway 1. But they're still stuck with the rules around that.
yeah, sometimes
You think
it's not
someone
as
can
agile
change
as
it
they
as
need to be.
well?
Yeah, often it's not as agile as we'd like it to be. Then in terms of action 15, so action 15 was prepare an overarching plan to identify and show priority sites within the South Ward for improvement and enhancement for ecological, recreational and flood protection purposes. So what I wanted to discuss with this one is that that's a very, it's written as a very general action. In reviewing this, we're wondering whether it was better to have this as a more targeted action, so targeting some groups and projects that we already know are doing work. So one could be the Pegasus Bay Coast Care Group, another could be specifically referencing Stanton Road and the development of that. So yeah, I was interested on the thoughts around the room around having a general action as opposed to something that's more specific to current work that's, or current or non-future work that could happen.
I think it makes sense to actually select 3 or 4 projects that, like you've said, and come up with some overarching plans for each of those projects. Overarching plans, such as Stanton Road.
And they might fit within overarching principles that would guide them.
That's what I'm saying.
I think it'd be good to work with the willing,
Did you say, Mark?
work with the willing,
Oh,
you know,
right.
those that are already in that space.
Yes, definitely.
Just from a point of view then of process, so let's say on that one, you go away and you develop a more specific plan than those more general words there. Does that then become part of the Amberley Spatial Plan final report that we adopt in late July?
It would.
And then it goes public, because I get, where I'm getting to is that somewhere in this, there's got to be feedback to the public about what came out of all of this. We adopted at the end of July. If it's got stuff in there that's that specific, like developing Stanton Road, et cetera, that again will give them a warm feeling about how this process has worked and some tangible results that they can sort of see in the future.
Well, Stanton Road ticks all 3 boxes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Ecological, recreational and flood protection.
So yeah, I support being more specific, yeah.
I think you gotta be careful though, chicken and the egg. The first thing was Stanton Road, I'd have thought would have been to confirm a plan around how it functions in a stormwater control, which we've already ordered. Followed by how development walkways, everything else might fit around that, not do it the other way around and find we can't quite do what we want with it because we said there's gonna be a playground there or something. So you 2 pieces of work to be done at the same time almost.
Is there general comfort for us to have another go at the wording, being more specific? And then I guess a question from that is whether prior to us taking this to the council meeting, whether you'd like the opportunity to have any prior feedback on that, or whether you're happy with us based on the discussion today to present that at the council meeting. I mean, it would probably have to be I guess a email exchange rather than.
If you had a draft of your final report available by, I don't know, early July or something like that, that we, particularly as local, all councillors, but particularly I guess local councillors would be interested, could feed back to you, you know, in a 24-hour time zone by email. So you, if you wanted to, if there was a point that one of us picked up that you wanted to then amend the final report, then do so. It's certainly better to do that than hear from us on the 30th of July, or whatever it is. Particularly if you're going to be away shortly thereafter.
So if you're going to be quite specific, say about Stanton Road for argument's sake, and we are talking ecological and flood protection, we know that's probably already covered, but ecological and recreational, where will you get those, where will you generate those ideas from?
In terms of,
if we were we're looking at it for flood protection as well, but if we would also utilise it for recreational purposes, bearing in mind the ecological benefits of it as well, where are you planning on getting those ideas from?
You would present a fairly blank canvas, I would think.
I mean, I was just looking at the wording of that number 15, and it's probably, maybe it's too broad in its thinking. And I mean, I don't know whether I'm on the right track or not, but I wondered whether if you're looking to prepare an overarching plan to identify priority sites within the South Ward to enhance ecological, recreational and flood protection purposes, kind of narrows it down to actually something that might not, like you might be spreading the thoughts too wide.
Yeah.
You know, it might just be 2 sites that you identify.
yeah,
It's not conclude, it's not saying there won't be others, but I don't know. And that could be spun out to councillors and they'll confirm within 24 hours maybe, I don't know.
yeah, so maybe we'll, yeah, maybe it'll be good if we go away and have a bit more of a think about that, and then, yeah, provide something through email for councillors to confirm.
That'd be great.
Leafield Beach is kind of already happening with the natural good down there. So who knows, it's timing and chicken and egg and everything else, but it might be standing in Leafield Beach.
Yeah. All right, I think if we. Yeah, so that was the action plan. I think if we're going to contact, I guess have further correspondence with councillors around the changes to the spatial plan. I probably don't necessarily go through the slide because I can sort of pinpoint those when send that out. Anything else that we?
No, I think we can get the amendments done, probably we're targeting 20th of June-ish,
Yeah.
so as soon as possible after that, and we'll just seek feedback by email to make sure it's on track for the council meeting.
Yeah, if anybody has any further thoughts that we didn't crop up today, then yeah, let me know and yeah, proceed from there. So thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, Joyce.
Perfect.